Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You'll hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Well, welcome back to the Rural Scoop. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf, and today's episode takes us on a journey that's as inspiring as it is grounded in the realities of rural life. My guest, Cari Warnock, has worn many hats: educator, leader, grant strategist, and now she's a senior consultant at CDW. But what ties it all together really is her deep connection to the mission of serving rural schools and communities with both heart and hustle. Cari's story begins in a small town where she learned the lessons of hard work, perseverance, and community that have carried her from rodeos to corporate boardrooms. She's written over $1 million in successful grants and has managed $40 million projects. And she's developed frameworks to help schools build capacity and design for success. But her story goes beyond the numbers. It's about identity and resilience and leading with authenticity. So, Cari, welcome to the Rural Scoop. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm excited to be here.
Well, let's start at the beginning. You've described your journey as from the rodeo to corporate, which I love. That's fantastic. But can you tell us a little bit about growing up and what those early experiences in rural life really taught you about work and community and perseverance?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of call it my cowgirl to corporate change over time. Because when I think back about my experience growing up, being an adopted child who, ended up with farm and rancher parents and ended up on land where, you could run around with no shoes on and you could interact with animals and ride horses and go to, rodeos and things like that, really just taught me so much about perseverance and resilience and grit, really, because it's a hard life. It's a lot of work. But also that, we can all contribute in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that was really important about the rural setting that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm. When you think back to growing up, Cari, what are those lessons from growing up rural that still guide how you lead today, especially in spaces that don't always understand rurality and rural values?
I think it's all about place, space, and face. If I'm in someone's face and I'm in their place and their space, and I have respect for however they grew up, right, and their story of origin, and maybe I'm able to share my own, I think that it helps us all to connect because rural spaces are different. They are unique. And today they're even more unique because technology is being used in rural spaces. And so, when I think about how I grew up and how very different that is from someone who grew up in a city or someone who grew up in an urban area, there was just so many life lessons that I'm so thankful that I had. Maybe they were hard when I was a child, but I'm thankful that I had them now and that I'm able to share those in people's place, space, and face.
You have a really remarkable personal story, and you mentioned a little bit about it. But you shared that you were left at the hospital by your birth parents, and you were adopted by your farm and ranch parents who raised you with a deep sense of community and love and grit. And you often say that you have become a victor, not a victim. So can you talk a little bit about how that's kind of shaped your outlook on leadership and service?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anybody's origin story could take them down one of two paths or one of multiple paths. And over the years, as a school leader and as a teacher and as a director of programs, and as someone who was writing, a lot of grants, $100 million in grants, seeking money to serve teachers and kids, I ran across tens of thousands of students in my career. And, they each had a story. And they could become a victim or they could become a victor. And so I realized very quickly that I could communicate with my students effectively when I shared my own story. And when they thought that their life was maybe distressed or in a really bad spot, or they didn't like their upbringing or who they lived with, and I shared my own story, and I told them, listen, I had a choice. I have an adopted brother who chose the other path. And I chose the victor path and he chose the victim path. And our lives are in two very different places today. And so I think it's about mindset. I also think it's about faith and courage and bravery and taking lessons from our parents and our grandparents. But I really believe that our students and our teachers have the possibility is being endless. It's the power of yet with our students. And I really believe in that, you can make a choice, victim or victor.
Yeah. I would imagine that perspective really gives you a lot of empathy for students whose stories just don't fit in a traditional mold.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times sitting in that leadership seat, counseling families about a drastic change happening in their family or something horrific or a trauma, and them thinking because of my role and my title and degrees hanging on my wall that maybe I wouldn't understand, or maybe that I couldn't have empathy, or maybe I had never lived through something difficult. And as soon as I was able to listen with empathy, respond with empathy, lean in with questions, and then explain, I do understand. I have walked that path. I have been down that road. That's why I'm listening today, and that's why I care about your student. It really would change the conversations from almost a defensive nature on their side of the table, and they would drop all of their defensiveness, and then they were able to really listen for solutions that would drive their whole family, really, to find solutions, not just for the student, but the whole family.
Yeah. I really love that phrase, place, space, and face. It's pretty powerful. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that around how schools can better respect and reflect the diverse identities of their students and families? And in our rural communities, we know they are becoming increasingly diverse, which even lends more power to that phrase.
Absolutely. I remember being in school and provided with assignments about whether it was genetics in high school, whether it was just a family tree in elementary school. And I remember being told, well, go ask your grandparents or go look at the knuckles of your grandparents or the genetic whatever dispositions, of the family members that you have, or go home and make the family tree and figure out, where you came from. And those conversations were very difficult, not just for me and lack of understanding being small or being young, not understanding adoption, not understanding that these people are not genetically linked to me, but having to learn that at 8 or 9 and understand that. But also just feeling like I didn't have a response. I didn't have something that I could bring back to school to talk about, and feeling concerned and worried about how will that come across to the rest of my classmates and what do they know about this path that I'm on. And many times school leaders, principals, teachers, staff would say, well, you don't look like your brother. Or, gosh, I met your parents. You don't look like either one of them. And growing up, going to churches where the community that we were going to church in looked nothing like me, and I looked nothing like them. And knowing that I was in these very diverse places, but that I looked nothing like the people did not bother me, but it did bother people who were questioning how I was related to my family because I didn't look like them. So I think when we're considering rural spaces and we're considering the diversity of our country and the changes in our student demographics and the changes that we've seen over the last 10 years and we will continue to see, I think just leaning in with some empathy and understanding and having some curiosity and questions rather than making judgments or rather than saying something very offensive to a small child when they don't maybe even understand. So I really think just leaning in when we're in somebody's space, when we're in their place and it's their community and it's our community, and just bringing our faces together to really understand each other.
Carrie, what can educators do differently to make sure that we're honoring that identity with dignity, especially when you're talking about close-knit rural communities?
I go back to the National Board teaching standards, the National Board certification process that I did. It feels like a million years ago now. It was about 25, 26 years ago now. One of the very first standards is knowledge of your students. And I really have leaned into that over the years, even as tides have shifted or educational pendulums have swung. I really think knowledge of your students, families, and communities is still key, especially in rural places. I can remember my first teaching job, my first year. I ended up with students in my class, and I was also 𝐸SOL certified. I had to do the 𝐸SOL certification in my state that year. And I remember in my class having migrant workers' children in my class. And I remember speaking Spanish to them to ask them questions because I needed to understand what they were capable of as far as homework or projects or attendance and how I might support their family best. I didn't grow up in that type of a family, but I knew the farm and ranch lifestyle, and I knew maybe how they were living. And so I'll never forget that very first student that taught me so many lessons about how school looks different for him and about his family that worked so hard in the migrant farms and how they had to move for different seasons for different crops. Right. And I'll never, ever forget that learning curve for me as a very young first-year teacher. So I would encourage all of our rural educators to just lean in to get knowledge of our students and then respond with empathy.
You spent 25 years in educational leadership and then decided to make a transition to the corporate side of things. And that is a huge leap for anyone, but especially for someone who is as mission-driven as you are. So how do you keep mission and heart and hustle at the center of what you do now?
It's a really great question. And it all happened very serendipitously through a life change where I had to move from one state to another. And it was right before COVID. And so a lot of things were shifting. And like I always say, divine intervention has happened in my life so many times. And this was another case of that divine intervention leading me down a different path. But the way that I keep the mission and my heart and hustle towards these rural schools and towards small schools is by creating pathways and creating knowledge base. So allowing everyone around me to understand why I'm so mission critical and why I will not stop supporting students and teachers and leaders around our country and making it important and visible to them. And so no matter who I work with, no matter who is on my team, no matter who I work for, I will always share that mission up and out. I am very blessed that my current employer really respects the role that I have and the role that I play in 3 areas: strategy, partnership, and thought leadership. And I'm also very blessed that they really respect these small schools and that they want to do something. They're not turning a blind eye. They're not turning off their ears to the knowledge about these small schools, but they really want to lean in. So I feel very fortunate in that way. Was it a difficult transition? Absolutely. But do I see the payoff for small schools when I can bring partners and when I can bring people to them that can support them, when I can bring free resources and just literally just push them across the table like poker chips? That makes me so happy.
What have you learned in that process about building partnerships that really serve the students rather than the systems that they're operating within?
Yeah, so, all of the partners I work with, which is pretty much every single vendor that a school would be purchasing things from if you walk down a hallway of the school. If you start to look around at every single thing that's in your building and say, oh, where do we get that? Those are my partners. And they now, in the last 2 years, have become richly aware of the needs in these rural spaces. And they have asked me for updates. And so now I have a Carrie's Corner blog where I roll out some of those things and a small school spotlight as well, newsletter that goes out monthly. But, I just think focusing on the programs where there's free resources, they get free expert support, they get professional development and wraparound services. I think that's the win-win. So I've been lucky enough to be attached to many of those and start some of them, cultivate some of those, curate some of those, grow some of those programs even internationally, so that our students in the U.S. can take advantage of learning sustainable development goals and learning things in cultural competency from around the world that they wouldn't have had the chance to do. So I just think bringing those free resources to our students in the U.S., especially in our small schools, is vital. And I'm lucky to be able to grab the arms of those people and say, I want this for free in these schools.
And speaking of money, you've been able, as you mentioned before, $100 million in successful grants, and you've managed very large scale projects as well. 40 million is a big project, just incredible numbers. So can you talk a little bit about the story behind the journey into grant development and management?
Yeah, absolutely. I got into a role that was grant funded for the first time about 9 years into my career. So I was stepping out of a classroom, so to speak, or a grade level department chair type of a role into more of a district-wide role that had impact but was federally funded. And that got me really interested in, wait a second, if these are grant funded, the position will end. But what if I fall in love with the work and I want to continue? How would I do that? And so that's where I really got my grants development start, was through wondering how to sustain the jobs that we were in, because I did love the work and I was so attached to the work. And it was about zip codes that didn't have equity and didn't have promise and opportunity and didn't have access. And I really, really found myself loving that work. And that's when I started grant writing. I started, reading and learning and asking questions and going to grant developers. And, we didn't have as many opportunities back then for like webinars or free types of things, but I just did everything that I could surround myself. And every single time there was an opportunity, I raised my hand to go and to write that grant, to be a part of that team. And eventually people saw my passion and just said, oh, can you come lead this next grant? Oh, then it was superintendent calling saying, oh, can you write another one and bring in these principals and area superintendents? And it just kind of grew and grew. Now, it is not a one woman, one person band here. I have to just say it was a team every single time. It's a team of people with expertise and passion and grit and drive. And you find where their strengths are and you put them on that part of the writing team. So as I was at your conference just this week, I was sharing about grants in a session. And I said, if you have someone who loves Excel spreadsheets and budgets, don't put them in your project design, flowery writing, amplification of a storied team. Put them on spreadsheets. So really just using the people on the team where their strengths lie, I think is the best way. So it was not a one-woman show. It was always a team, but, I was leading with grace for those grants.
Can you talk a little bit about what you learned early on about aligning data and evidence and storytelling in a way that really helps districts stand out, especially our small and rural districts, which really is what can secure funding?
Yeah, absolutely. What I learned is data drives everything, right? Mm-hmm. Eligibility is one of the first questions that you have to ask. And so I have like a little framework that I share with people. I won't go into it now, but right at the very beginning, you have to ask, am I eligible for this? And the only way to figure that out is to look at the grant, either the competitive preference priorities or the guidelines, and go to data. Go to the USDA, go to the census data, go to all kinds of points of data, and then make a heat map, and then make a list of how am I actually eligible for this? And then you have to share that up and out with any entities who must sign off or who must approve. or who will support at the same time, right? You want to get letters of support from agencies, organizations, and groups and nonprofits that will help you. So I really think focusing in on your data is really important. And often the rural areas, the rural zip codes are eligible for some really interesting grants.
You mentioned your frameworks, and I know that we probably would need to have another episode to go into what they are, those methods that help leaders just process through a grant. But can you explain a little bit about what they are and how they would help keep a school strategic?
Yes, absolutely. And the one thing I will always say is don't write a grant to write the grant. You have to write the grant that aligns with your mission and vision and where you're headed strategically as a school or as an organization. So don't just randomly grab at things, but really be strategic in your knowledge of the grant. So my first acronym is SAAS, SAAS, and it's really just an introduction to grant writing. So it's search, use a grant wrangler, which I'm lucky enough that CDW has one that's free. And so I'm able to share that with schools, and I'm able to get people to look for all current grants. And we were able to add a rural button to the grant wrangler, so you can actually look for grants that are rural eligible, which is an amazing search feature.
Yeah, definitely.
Ask is the next one. Are we eligible? Is it viable? Does it align with our strategy? So S, search, A, ask, A, approvals. Do I need to get my board, an intent to apply? Is there a signature page? Next A is action. Build your team, get letters of support, your project design, your budget narrative, all those things. Get your consent for board meetings. And then S, submit, and get all your stakeholders involved. So that's my quick SAAS acronym.
You know, many of the leaders that are probably listening don't have a dedicated grant writer. So what advice would you give a rural superintendent or principal who's just beginning to build a culture of strategic funding rather than, chasing, as you said, things can be reactive. You're going after just the grant to go after the grant, and it may not align with what you need to be focused on.
That's a great question. And I think one of the things I would say is often there isn't a grant writer. So you have to find someone who's really interested in this topic and get them to become a champion and get them to sort of guide the rest. And the way that I have done that is, go for a small grant, go for a teacher educator grant from a foundation or just something small for the arts or maybe for STEM. When that teacher is awarded, throw a party, get out a disco ball, have laser light show, whatever you can afford to do. Go in the cow pasture and, celebrate, right? Get everyone else to know how great it was that this teacher succeeded. The next day, the next week, I guarantee you'll have 2, 3, 4, 8, 10 more people saying, can you teach me how to do that?
Yeah.
Then you get them to get awarded for a party, go through that cycle a few times, and suddenly you've got a ton of grant writers on your hands because you can't stop them. Once they're addicted, you can't stop them.
Like potato chips.
Yes. And the other piece of advice I would give is often third-party evaluators, which are either through colleges, universities, or they're private. Some of them are large agencies, but some of them are really just one-off singleton people running these third-party evaluation companies. And they sign up to evaluate these grants. Often I have hired them pro bono to write the evaluation section as long as I write them into something for the grant. So I contract with them, I make them an approved vendor. They get to do something later when I'm awarded. And those have been some of the most powerful partnerships that I could recommend to rural schools, because not only would they write the evaluation section, but then I can also lean on them for other advisement or guidance along the way for the grant, because they wanted me to be successful to write the grant and be awarded, because ultimately it would provide them a contract multi-year, typically 3 to 5 years. So I leaned on those folks a ton at first.
That's a great recommendation. You mentioned STEM, and I want to dive into that a little bit deeper, because you're doing something that I admire greatly. You have been championing women in leadership and STEM fields, and those are areas where rural women in particular often face additional barriers. So can you talk a little bit about the patterns that you see in that space and what helps women in those communities find their voice and their influence?
Absolutely. I'll say something that was shared with me through a Women in STEM night that we had for our Girls Who Game global call one night. And she was pretty high ranked in a tech company. And she spoke very authentically about how she really was still finding herself after all these years, and as high up as she was in the company, she really still felt a lack of confidence sometimes. And really, sometimes she felt like she was faking it until she was making it. And here I was thinking this person had come from schools and now was in this position where she was leading this great universal STEM, national STEM thing. So it really made me open my eyes to say, wow, okay, so we are all maybe not feeling as confident as we think. What could I do to help build that confidence? And confidence and competence is what I call a great combination. If you have the competence in STEM, but maybe you don't have the confidence or you haven't been exposed, how could we expose you? How could we help you to build that layer of competence on top of your confidence, or other way around? Whether that's through book studies, one-on-one conversations. I was pretty brave. I reached out to her and said, hey, I need to hear your story one-on-one. Can you give me 20 minutes? And she did. And she shared with me, some books that she'd read, some webinars that she had gone on to, and some things she'd done to bolster her own confidence. And she shared with me that she had like a one-on-one coach that she was using to really help support her professional growth. And so I immediately found someone, again, this was serendipity as well. She was in a coaching program through Johns Hopkins, and she needed guinea pigs, if I can say that. That's what she said to me. I need guinea pigs so I can do projects. Would you be one of my people I can coach? And I was like, yes, raise my hand for that. Sure, 40 hours of free coaching. She actually guided me through many layers of competence and confidence through those 40 hours of free coaching. So my advice would be ask questions and be curious, even when you think the person looks really confident and competent in their role. Ask them how they got there. Ask them how they feel. Don't be afraid to lean into your vendors and partners in STEM and ask for opportunities. Would they like you to come talk on a webinar and you've never done it before? Perfect. Go do it, right?
Yep.
Also read books, lean on other people, go to LinkedIn. There's so many ways now virtually that even if you're rural, you can learn from the best of the best anywhere. So I would just say lean in and just read. And then go out on a limb, be bold, be courageous, do something you've never done before. Maybe you've never stood in front of your faculty meeting, virtually or in person, because I know some of our rural schools are, doing some virtual things, but maybe you've never led a workshop or a presentation before and you're scared to do it. I say do it.
Yeah. Besides your coach, who have been the mentors or the models that really have helped you carve your own leadership path?
So I had a manager, that first role that I told you about when I stepped out of teaching and stepped into a different role that was grant funded. She really pushed me. My first 6 months on the job, she said, Carrie, I'm sending you on a trip to Washington, D.C. And you're going to go to Capitol Hill and you're going to meet with legislators. You're going to talk about why you're so passionate about this particular grant and equity for students and all the things that you're doing. And I was literally shaking. I had never been to Washington, D.C. Never. I had never been to the offices or the halls of the walls of that place to talk to people that were lawmakers. I was just this cowgirl, right? Like, how was I going to go there? And I remember thinking, oh, what am I going to wear? Who will I talk to? How will they know who I am? I'm from this small place. But that trip taught me so much. And that person taught me so much. She became my mentor. She was the person who said to me, if you want to rise in education, you need to get some advanced degrees and some advanced certificates. I did my national board certificate. I did my ESOL training. I got my principal level 2 certificate. I got my master's degree in education administration. And from there, it just sort of took off. I became, a consultant. I did so many things because she pushed me. Mm-hmm. So I would say she's definitely someone that I would say is a mentor. And then over the years, I've had many third-party evaluators and people inside the Department of Education program officers and people who were managing the funds also became, friends. They became colleagues. They became people who guided me and learned me up, really upskilled me in this world that I sort of landed in. So many people have surrounded me.
Phenomenal. What's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten, do you think?
Oh gosh. So the person that I'm thinking of right now, she was like a third-party consultant, educator, evaluator person in my very first role outside of teaching.
Sure.
And she listened to my passion around, creating equity for these students that didn't have opportunity. And she said, I'm going to tell you something right now. She said, you need to lean into that. You need to get involved. You need to get on that board. You need to go to Legislative Advocacy Day. You need to lean in and never stop leaning in. And I was like, what? Seriously? Like this small town person who, grew up farm and ranching, like really? Like I can go do something? And every single time I would see her at the annual conference, she would say, so what'd you do? Did you get on the board? Did you lean in? Did you go? What's your progress? Are you doing those things? And so slowly but surely, she grew my confidence and my competence. And I started to join the board. I started to get on committees. I started to do legislative advocacy work. Who knew? Like I could have never guessed that for myself, but she really encouraged me. So that best advice was lean in and don't ever stop leaning in.
I love that. I want to shift this just a little bit because you've been doing some mentoring and coaching to districts as well. And one of the things that you are supporting them around is emerging technology and AI and navigating those technologies, whether it's digital systems that can make work more efficient or how AI shows up in rural places. So can you talk a little bit about your advice for rural leaders who really want to innovate responsibly and making sure that they're balancing progress with privacy and trust, which I know is a concern for many of our rural schools?
Such a loaded question, and I'm going to try to make a concise answer here. So I do a lot of work around AI and technology. And of course, being a former school leader, thinking about data privacy is utmost important when you're leading schools or districts, right? So absolutely make sure the vendors that you're working with, make sure that you've read the contractual language. I know a lot of these rural places do not have maybe procurement departments, or they don't have a legal department. They don't have a lot of staff. And so if you don't have a lot of staff, run that through Google's Gemini, for example, or Microsoft's Copilot. Ask for a summary. You can say, write me a 3-paragraph summary. Did this contract miss any of the language that would be required to protect our students' data for data privacy? And you can even put in there, FERPA, COPA, all the HIPAA, all the laws, right? You can put those into Gemini and just say, please make sure this contract meets all of these. That way, at least you've got some knowledge and you can then negotiate with those vendors about your students' data. Next, I would say that, Google owns the entire stack for Gemini. So when I'm having conversations with districts and I'm talking to different types of employees inside that have different titles, like from a principal to a guidance counselor, a social worker, a psychologist, a teacher, an instructional coach, an IT leader, they're all different titles. When I'm creating prompts for them, which I usually give out a free prompt page at my workshop, I'm saying to them, like, if a teacher accidentally puts in student information, maybe they'll want to ask for like IEP recommendations or accommodations or help me to support a student with this disability. Sometimes, they accidentally put in private information. Maybe they accidentally write the kid's name or they accidentally write too much information. The one thing I will say is that because Gemini owns the whole stack, that information is safe. It does not go out to that large language model or that big cyberspace out there. So that's really a good thing for our schools, and many of our schools have Google tools. So that's another thing I would say. And then just lastly, be curious. Find ways to make your job more efficient so that you can have more time to walk classrooms, coach teachers, mentor staff, be those eyes and ears on your campus, which is very difficult to do in a school day. Believe it or not, as the instructional leader, sometimes you find yourself wanting to be an instructional leader, but it's very difficult to do. But be curious about what ed tech tools can do to make your job more efficient so you can release time to do those things that you want to do.
Do you have any favorite apps that you use to create that time? Because you're right, being able to get out and be visible on your campus and see what's going on, or being out in the community if you're the superintendent, is really part of the joy of the work, but it's also a responsibility of the work. So do you have suggestions on what they might be able to use to upskill those kinds of opportunities?
I use all the tools that come with my laptop or any free tools. So like, for example, Microsoft, a lot of people use Outlook, the calendar, or they use the tools, the apps inside of Microsoft. You have an A3 or an A5 or an A7 licensure typically. So I go in there and I look for the apps that will help me, like maybe Planner or Flow or, whichever thing I'm trying to do, I look there. Gemini is free, so you can get the app on your phone. You can get it on your desktop. I go there. I use Gemini all day long, pretty much. And I use Copilot as well, inside of like my slide decks and things like that. But also Gemini has other tools like Notebook LM and Vids, which schools find really amazing and capture the essence of creativity for kids and for teachers and for leaders. So I don't know that I have a favorite, but I have a lot of tools that I love to use on a daily basis.
If they're exploring and taking a look at the different options that are out there, what are some practical steps that they might be able to take to build confidence and capacity during that exploration?
Yeah, so start asking questions inside of the prompt, inside of the tool that you're using. And if you're going to use a tool that isn't already embedded inside your educational space, just be really careful. I won't name them, but there's a ton of other, open AI tools and artificial intelligence bots and things like that. And that can be a little dangerous. So I would stick with whatever's inside your ecosystem already and whatever you have for free. And I would start with simple questions like, here's my calendar for the day. How can I create some efficiency today and add some classroom walkthroughs if that's your role? Or where in my calendar today and my schedule today could I spend some time making phone calls to parents? Or just basic questions. Just go in there and start prompting different things. And then as you prompt and you get the answer, say to yourself, oh, I forgot to tell it I only wanted it to give me 2 or a paragraph or a 1-pager or 3 answers, because sometimes it'll come back with a really long answer. And so getting better at prompting, I think, is a key to the first understanding of how you can use it to create efficiency. So as you ask, then add more layers of complexity to your prompt and to your questions, and act like it's your thought leader and tell it that. Say, okay, Gemini, I want you to be my thought leader. I'm a principal of a K-5 school. I'm in this rural city in this rural part of America. I have this problem on my hands today. Be a thought leader. Tell me what I should be thinking about. Or if you have a really difficult community meeting coming up about boundaries or funding sources or courses that you're taking away or adding, or something that's really passionate in the community that's going to maybe draw a big crowd or maybe draw some excitement or some fear or anticipation, let it be your thought leadership, almost like a mirror practice for yourself before you actually go out and speak to those community members.
It's a great idea. A lot of our rural schools, and you mentioned this before, are really working with tight budgets. And you mentioned Gemini is free, but are there other resources, whether they're no cost or low cost, that you think rural schools should be paying attention to right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think anything that's going to help them do their job quicker, better, more efficient, with more efficiency, but also anything that's going to be natural to their ecosystem. That's where I would say to start. And, even ask your AI, ask it, what free tools are out there this week, or what free tools have come onto the market, or what free apps are available, because there are quite a few that are free that you really don't need to go and expend any money to get them. But if you're, wanting leadership, if that's your track, if you're wanting to grow in your leadership, then I would say head that direction through LinkedIn, for example. Tons of free resources there, and courses and webinars and classes and things. If you're looking for AI, some of my partners have like free AI courses. So go and get those. HP, which a lot of people buy their laptops. So it would be, a vendor partner of a school. They have an HP AI for teachers. That's a great course. I went through it myself just to see exactly what was in it, embedded inside of it. Intel, which runs the chips inside of the laptops that many of our rural schools have purchased. So they would be a partner vendor of our rural schools. They have something called Skills for Innovation, SFI. It's a free program. And guess what? They have a huge community online that you can join. And so if you're wanting to grow and learn, but stay in your space and in your place and stay rural, but you really want to learn and bring that back to your students or your school, go do one of those, right? It's free. Go join it. Get the Skills for Innovation curriculum for your students. Girls Who Game is through Dell, and CDW is also supporting it now too, but great program. It's free. Go get some students involved in that. So there's so much out there that's free. And I just love being able to share that with our schools, our small schools especially. But get out there and try something.
Yeah. You've really worn a lot of different hats. You've been a teacher, a leader, a strategist, an advocate. And through it all, you really, Cari, have stayed deeply connected with your rural roots. So when you look back, what are you most proud of in how rural communities continue to innovate and adapt and to care for their students?
I live in a rural community now. I like to see cows, horses, pigs, and other animals. It just makes me happy. And I'm on a foundation board where I live because I want to be close to the school district. It's not a system I've worked in. So I want to be close to the problems to solve for here so that I can find solutions. And so what I'm most proud of is when I hear the hard work, when I hear the diligence, when I hear the perseverance, when I watch students in rural communities win awards, get scholarships, when I see these schools doing unique things and innovative things, stepping outside of the comfort zone, but allowing the students to stay rural and to stay in their comfort zone and, having respect for the differences in some of the rural areas versus the more suburban areas, right? And allowing our students to even expose each other to things. If you live in a rural community and you know about things that kids in suburban and urban areas don't know about, putting that student on the pedestal and having them, win awards and having them be in a press release about what they did, just teaches me so much about our kids today and about the promise that there is in our rural communities. One of the things that really stuck with me that I think I'd like to leave this community of the Rural Scoop to listen about, really struck a chord with me was the meeting about legislative advocacy at the National Rural Conference, the Forum for Rural Educators. Just thinking about how might we, the power of yet, and how might we. So how might we together as communities, how might we together as educational leaders, as teachers, as parents, community members, stakeholders, how might we band together to start to amplify the stories coming out of our rural communities so that everybody in lawmaking and everybody in our communities across our country can see why it's important. Yeah. And one of the things I was left with also from your conference was the Utah Department of Education director of IT that spoke. One of the pictures that I took on my phone that I will never delete and that will stay with me forever, he showed the map of Utah and he showed the most southern school point. And he showed that the last 120 miles of fiber that they were putting in to connect those students to broadband at the same level as everyone else across the state. And it was a truck with 2 massive reels of fiber on the back. Yep. And in the background were just these huge monument mountains at the southern tip of Utah. And he said, this is the last 120 miles. I get chills right now just thinking about his story and about what they've done. So I'm proud of what these small schools are doing across America for our students. And I think we need to amplify the stories even more.
Well said. Very well said. How do you see your own story continuing to evolve as you keep serving rural education in this next chapter of your career?
That's a really interesting question. And it's a conversation I had while I was at the conference with someone I had just met. And we were talking about how in our careers, just divine intervention had happened like every 3 years or so. I've been asked or called up to do and to serve something else or someone else. Even when I wasn't looking for it, it literally happened to me every 3 years. And I'm coming up on my 3rd anniversary in January in this role. So I've been reflecting a lot on what does that look like for me now? Where might God send me in my next chapter? I don't actually know. But that door is always open for the possibility of the power of yet in my life. And I still have a lot to give. I have a lot of time to be able to serve others. So I don't know what it holds, but I do know that my heart and hustle will be in the same place to provide access and opportunity and equity for our students in zip codes that are underserved across this country. And however that might look or feel will be my next chapter.
That's fantastic. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like the listeners to know?
Oh, gosh. It's a really good question. I don't know that I have an answer for it right now. But I guess I would just say, if you're curious about anything that I said, or if you're curious about how I am where I am now, which is seriously unbelievable still to me. And so if you're curious and you just want to talk to me, I am open. I always give any person who asks me for 30 minutes for advisement or counseling or support, I always provide it. So if you want to get me on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn page and message me, if you get my email or phone number from this Rural Scoop podcast, however you get in touch with me, just know that my door is open and I will listen and respond with empathy, and I will be curious with you if that's a path that you'd like to walk.
Love that. Carrie, I always end with a question that you've probably heard me ask, and that is, when you hear the term rural advantage, what does that mean to you?
I really think that there are a lot of advantages to being in a rural place, right? I really don't think when people talk about the disadvantage that they think about the other side of the coin, which are the advantages.
Right.
Being in a smaller place allows you to be in each other's face, space, and place a little more often and a little more authentically, and maybe in a little bit more of a real way. It doesn't mean you're behind the times or not techie, or it doesn't mean that you're not advanced. It doesn't mean that you're not something or anything. It means that you have a different perspective, and it means that you maybe grew up with grit and perseverance and resilience that no one else has ever even had to do before. So you have extras on your side in the plus column than you do in the delta side of the column. So I think it's a huge advantage. I don't think there's anything that is a disadvantage about it, maybe except that you have to drive further to get to a gas station or a store or something like that. That might be a little bit of a disadvantage, but no, I really do think it is an advantage to live in a small community.
Yep, I would agree with you. That's a great answer. Well, Carrie, thank you for joining me today. And I really appreciate you reminding us that leadership in rural education really begins with heart It's about knowing who you are and where you came from and who you serve. And your story is really a powerful reflection of what's possible when courage really meets purpose. So thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Sadorf. It was my pleasure, truly.
And for my friends that are listening, I hope this conversation left you thinking about your own story, about how your rural roots and your relationships and your daily work really contribute to something bigger than any one classroom or community. And that really is the power of rural education. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to like and follow and subscribe wherever you listen to the Rural Scoop, and share this with somebody who believes, like Carrie and I do, that rural schools are the heartbeat of our communities. And remember, the rural advantage isn't just geography, it's grit, it's connection, it's the belief that we lead together with our students and our communities, and we all thrive together. So I'm Melissa Sadorf, and this is the Rural Scoop, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Rural Scoop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these important rural conversations going. And we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or share your thoughts. You can follow along and never miss a new release by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or by following us on social. We're on YouTube at The Rural Scoop, Instagram at msadorf1, and X at msadorf03. The Rural Scoop is produced with support from Vela Educational Consultants. To learn more, visit velaconsultants.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education. And as always, keep leaning into the rural advantage.